very happy to answer any questions at the end. So I think, Temu, you've started the recording, is that right? Great. Okay. And thank you very much for suggestions in the chat for our future topics to be covered. Some of the issues maybe we can discuss even today, but definitely feel free to let us know what would be good to cover in the future series. So today I'm going to provide a particular insight into this question of why are children so different. Obviously, this is a huge question, and children differ for a whole host of reasons. And as parents, if we have many parents today, then you know that if you, for example, are a parent of 2 children or more than 1 child, you would know that children, even in the same family, differ greatly. So today I will approach this topic from the point of view of twin studies. Largely, but we can discuss other things as well. So a lot that we've learned about why children differ comes from investigating or conducting studies with participation of twins. So before I kind of go any further into this, I wanted to give you some statistics. So monozygotic and dizygotic twins, so these are monozygotic twins are twins that are genetically identical. They come from one single fertilized cell that splits into 2. So monozygotic twinness occurs in about 3% per every 1,000 deliveries worldwide. So about much less than 1% of the world population. Dizygotic twins are twins that come from 2 independently fertilized eggs. So they are no more similar than just other siblings, brothers or sisters. Dizygotic twinness is about 2 to 7% per 1,000 births in Asia, 9 to 20% per 1,000 births in Europe, and more common in some other populations. So, for example, some African populations and some Latin American populations have been cited many twins, dizygotic twins. So dizygotic twinness differs from place to place. And that is because we think there is some kind of genetic component to dizygotic twinness. It runs in families. So if there are twins in a family, it is likely that other family members may also have dizygotic twins. Whereas monozygotic twins, we don't really know why it occurs. So it's some kind of perhaps random event. So here you're looking at some examples of twins. So, for example, at the bottom, you're seeing the monozygotic twin girls, monozygotic twin boys. We have a dizygotic twin pair here. And at the top here, I have this cutting from an English newspaper where just by chance they ended up with 3 sets of monozygotic twins in a kind of local football team. So this just kind of to illustrate that, first of all, twinness is quite common, and secondly, to illustrate that chance plays such a big role in our lives. This is really quite a rare event that all these twins would end up in one local football team. Now, another thing I wanted to mention is that twinness has actually risen in recent years to about 3 and now almost 4%. And the reason for this kind of increase in twin births is because in artificial insemination, so in various assisted reproductive technologies used births, often 2 eggs are implanted so that to maximize the chances of successful pregnancy. So there are more and more dizygotic twins in the world because of increased rate of in vitro fertilization and other assisted reproductive technologies in the world. So having kind of given this background, I want to say that Twins are, of course, extremely interesting, an extremely interesting group to work with and to study. But also, we are very, very grateful to many, many, many thousands of twins in the world who are part of, who kind of engage with science by being participants in scientific studies. So, for example, I have been lucky to have worked on a very large-scale twin study that is running here in the UK. It's called the Twins Early Development Study. If you are interested in knowing more about it, you can just Google or put in any search engine and search for TEDS or Twins Early Development Study, and you will see a lot of information, both in terms of the study itself, but also the kind of information that this study has provided about development of all children. So we study twins to understand all children. And so this study has been running already in the UK for over 20 years, and it involves approximately 7,500 pairs of twins followed from birth to young adulthood where they are now. So it's a really kind of large-scale study. And in this study, there are, as I already mentioned, there are monozygotic and dizygotic twins. And for dizygotic twins, we have same-sex twins and opposite-sex twins. So it's a very comprehensive study. And recently, our twins have begun to become parents themselves. And so another study has been initiated, which is called Children of Twins study, which is also very informative and can tell us a lot about the kind of processes of child development. So in TEDS, many different things are investigated. So more than 400 publications have been published. And so in this study, we research all kinds of aspects from home and school environment and the influences of environment on development, physical health and well-being, kind of personality and motivation, mental health, cognitive development, and academic achievement. So these are broad areas of interest in this study. And today I'll just mention several things that we found out. But as I mentioned, many publications have provided a lot of insights into child development. And here you're looking at the photographs of just one pair of twin girls, and sometimes their other sibling. So as they were kind of growing in our study. Just to also, one last thing about kind of twin studies, I want to say that there are many twin studies in the world. So for example, this journal some years ago in 2019 published a kind of collection describing all the many twin studies in the world in different countries. And I have also been involved in working with twins in Russia and in the United States. And also I know very well some other researchers in different countries who also work with large twin studies. So before I tell you about what we've learned from twins about all children, I just wanted to kind of ask you a question. Maybe you can kind of muse about it. There is this, twin studies, of course, can also be used to answer questions specifically about twins. Are they special? How do they develop? And one question that is very, very relevant to parents of twins is whether they should be studying together or separately. Should they attend one classroom or separate classroom? And if I asked you, now we don't have much time, but it would be interesting to know what opinions you have. And from my experience, usually people disagree. So some people saying twins should be raised together, and for that they are kind of citing a very well-established kind of closeness between twins, the very close emotional bond, they support each other, and so separating twin may be a very traumatic event for twins. On the other hand, some people believe that twins should be studying separately because there is a danger that teachers begin to kind of view them as more or less one person. Twins play tricks sometimes, especially monozygotic twins, pretending to be each other. They may be distracted by their very close relationship, etc. And so these are not trivial questions, and actually different countries follow different policies on that. Some countries separate twins in education. For example, in Canada, in many schools, it is recommended and sometimes compulsory for twins to go to different classrooms. In the UK, in primary school, children usually study together, but then begin to kind of be more and more separated, and especially in educational system where there is any kind of tracking or streaming, where children attend different classrooms depending on current ability or performance, then twins begin to kind of more and more diverge, especially dizygotic twins who are more different usually. In Russia, twins almost always study together. So you can see that different countries have different educational policies and they have various justifications for that. So some years ago, a team of scholars, myself and my other colleagues, we actually analyzed a lot of data that was available in our UK study and the Canadian study to kind of ask questions. Well, what if we compare those twins who study together and those twins who study separately, and ask the questions, which of the groups performs better, studies better, enjoys subjects better? So we basically evaluated the effects on performance and motivation of being separated or studying together. And what we found really is consistent with many other findings that we have. We found that there are no average differences between these groups. So whether children studied together or separately, their performance was not better or worse, and their motivation was not greater or less. So in this paper, we concluded that actually there is no policy that can be countrywide or school-wide in relation to this question. And really, whether a particular twin pair should study together or separately should be a complex decision taken by parents, children, and schools working together, trying to find the best approach for a particular pair. And I'm making this point because this is also true for all children, that it seems more and more that any kind of policy-wide decisions do not capture individuality of a child. And so most kind of progress in education will be through finding individualized approaches to children. So now I want to talk a little bit about a concept of gene-environment co-action. You probably have heard many times of something like nature-nurture debate, or people often have these questions, well, why is this child, for example, inattentive? Or why is this child struggling with schoolwork or something? And often people have very strong views. Well, this is because, let's say, their parents are not doing something, or their teacher is unmotivating, or something, or maybe it's genetic. So often it is some kind of like dichotomous or categorical response that people provide. From my experience, when I talk to school kind of heads of schools or policymakers, they are often very dismissive of a complex approach. So, for example, I would like to quote one head of school who told me, but of course academic achievement has nothing to do with genes. And this is a very dismissive position, and also it does not is not at all supported by modern science. Today, it's absolutely clear that any human characteristic or trait develops under the influence of both genes and environment that are kind of interplaying or co-acting in complex ways. So this gene-environment interplay remains a kind of elephant in the room, because really, if you talk to people, most people accept that genetics has something to do with our character, our personality, our ability, and similarly, environments are very important. But when people talk about it, especially in educational contexts, often people become very one-sided. But the fact of the matter is that the closer relatives are genetically, the more similar they are in appearance, personality, and behavior. And in twin studies, we see that monozygotic twins are always more similar than dizygotic twins, even if they don't grow up together. And so this illustrates that really there is some genetic contribution to most human traits. If you are interested in more evidence of this simple statement, I really recommend this interactive website where a group of researchers summarized a lot of evidence from many studies, actually studies of more than 14 million pairs of twins, and presented evidence for different human traits, from heart disease to motivation. What they have shown is that for every one of these traits, both genetic and environmental factors were important or are important for development. And if you put all human traits together, which you can do in this interactive website, you will get an answer that is, I reflected here on the graph, that on average, genes explain about 50% of variability in all human traits, which means that another half of variability is explained by environments. So today, science definitively has demonstrated that nature-nurture debate has been resolved. It is both genes and environments, and they often interact, and I'll say a little bit more about this. So here I'm just showing several snippets of data, so several publications, which the slides will be available to you so you can find them. Many of them are open source. And these publications show that both genes and environment affect personality characteristics, motivation, self-perceived ability, and even things like anxiety or even specific anxieties. Like in this paper, we're looking at a phenomenon that is called mathematical anxiety. So this is a severe kind of emotional response to situations where you need to operate with numerical, kind of make numerical operations. Here is some more more publications which show, for example, that genes and environment both affect academic achievement, but not only achievement, but also the choice of subjects that children want to study at school, for example, at A levels. So what we're finding, for example, that monozygotic twins choose more similar subjects or the same subjects, whereas dizygotic twins are much more different in the subjects that they choose to carry on studying. And so that again demonstrates kind of genetic contribution. But also monozygotic twins are not identical in their choices, and that demonstrates environmental contribution to these choices. So even choices are genetically driven and environmentally driven to some extent. Another set of papers here demonstrates that even the concept of social mobility is not entirely social. So, this is the situation where people doing better or worse than their parents. And of course, social factors are extremely important. So, for example, removing some limitations from where people can study or what they study, or economic limitations, is of course helpful for social mobility. But recent research suggests that even within a family, two siblings may differ. So, for example, one sibling may kind of outperform their parents in terms of social success. So, for example, greater salary or better job. And another sibling can actually step down from their parents' success. And recent research shows that genes are also involved in this going up or going down on the mobility ladder. So it's not just social limitations, but also genetic factors via many different processes. So now I've mentioned a lot the word genes, and I want to kind of perhaps dispel one myth that, again, I often come across. So often people think that genes have these very strong effects. So, for example, that there is a gene for cancer, or a gene for heart disease, or a gene for depression, or maybe a gene for mathematical talent. And if you are not one of these people, then I certainly know many people who really believe that there is some kind of genetic mutation, which, depending on which variant you will have either this or that characteristic. But in reality, and so here I'm illustrating this with this cartoon where a child goes to a teacher and says, I had my doctor do a DNA blood analysis, and as I suspected, I'm missing the math gene. And of course, it's a caricature, but Many people do think about genetic effects in this kind of categorical way. Or if I illustrated it with the picture of kind of needle in a haystack, this will be this enormous needle. But in reality, genetic effects are very, very minute. They are small. So it really is like looking for many, many, many needles in a haystack. Because today, from a lot of recent research, we know that human traits are polyfactorial, multiple factors, that many genes and many environments kind of affect, I wanted to say here poly-environmental. So many genes and many environments make a contribution to every human trait. So for example, if I want to ask, why do some children develop inattention, then the answer to that is because there are many genetic factors and many environmental factors that come together to kind of produce these symptoms or signs of inattention in a child. So it's never one thing, and it's never even two or three things. It really is a very polyfactorial system. So I wanted to mention a couple of other things that we learned from twin studies. So for example, here I'm illustrating three very common kind of problems that children may experience. And they are not just present in children, but actually continue often in adulthood. So the first picture, you can see a little boy struggling with mathematics. And this, in severe forms, is called dyscalculia. So kind of inability to calculate, but it's much more than that. Sometimes children with dyscalculia are actually very poor at understanding any numerical relations. Even, for example, the fact that 6 is more than 5. So in extreme forms, it can be very serious. In the more milder forms, dyscalculia or mathematical disability is simply kind of struggling with mathematical information. The next picture illustrates this kind of dragon made of numbers. And this is another condition I already mentioned. So this is mathematical anxiety. So this is a real problem. It really is an anxiety, and it could be clinically diagnosed. So anxiety, your heart is racing, your palms are sweating, your working memory is preoccupied with really negative thoughts. And this leaves very little scope for task at hand. So mathematical anxiety can be very disruptive. And of course, there are many other forms of anxiety. It's just that this one is really common. And it's common not just in children, but also adults. For example, many psychology students that we teach report mathematical anxiety. So the third condition here is dyslexia. So this little boy is writing in Russian, he's writing a phrase, I try, but he makes number of mistakes in this very simple phrase. So dyslexia is also real, and in extreme forms, it is extremely disruptive, where people cannot process written text. In milder forms, people kind of are semi-successful, but are also struggling. So what we have learned about these conditions and some other learning disabilities or problems is that, again, like many other things, they develop under the influence of both genetic and environmental factors. But genetically, they overlap to a large extent. So a same group of genes contributes to all of these conditions. So they're not highly specialized, but there is something general that contributes to the development of all these problems. And so today we actually have quite a lot of information about how these conditions develop. And hopefully this information will be useful for developing kind of therapeutic approaches. So one of the last things I want to mention is, I already kind of mentioned it as an elephant in the room or in the classroom, is this idea of continuous gene-environment co-action. Genes and environments cannot be separated. Actually, there are kind of multiple processes through which they interact. So, for example, in this picture of a little baby looking at the DNA with extreme interest, what is illustrated here is that, often in psychology or in education, environment is presented in a kind of passive way. So a child finds themselves in a particular environment and this environment affects them. But in reality, we are active players of creating our environments. We select, we modify, we create our experiences partly based on genetic propensities. So for example, this young baby may be very interested in this model, but another of DNA, but another young baby may be completely disinterested in this information. And of course, despite the fact that they are in the same environment currently, they will be extracting different information from it. So this concept is called gene-environment correlation, how our genes to some extent influence how we perceive environments and therefore how environments affect us. And another kind of concept is gene-environment interaction. So once we are in a particular environment, we experience it differently and react to it differently. So, for example, often we talk about teachers as if they have this kind of unifying effect on children in a classroom. It's called the teacher effect. But in reality, children in the same classroom experience this environment differently. And we have shown it multiple times in our studies, where the same, for example, two twins in the same classroom will rate their teacher differently. And this is particularly true of dizygotic twins. Similarly, dizygotic twins rate their parents as more different, so in more different way than monozygotic twins. So, for example, one twin may say, my parents are very strict, they're too strict, they're draconian, they are authoritarian. And another twin would say, my parents are doing a great job, you know, they are enforcing rules, they help me build my character, kind of thing. So really, these are different perceptions of the same situation. So gene-environment coaction is a very important concept. But gene-environment coaction happens not just at the level of the family or a classroom, but can also be kind of happening at the macro level. So, for example, it has been demonstrated in several studies that if society is very unequal, so for example, some portion of society has excellent access to resources, to educational and medical resources, and really is very affluent, and another portion of society does not have this access, then the outcomes can be massively different for children, but not just because of the actual absence of resources, but also because genetic potential, genetic propensities in children, for example, can actually not express. So genes need food in terms of environment, in terms of stimulation, in terms of choice. So often people have predispositions to really to flourish, to succeed, to excel, but they cannot, these genes do not have any chance to be expressed in the restrictive society or in the restrictive environment. So people in unequal societies differ not only because of inequality itself, but also because of what this inequality can do to their genes. And in fact, there is this whole new area of science, which is called epigenetics, which really studies the response of our genes to environments. So some of the very interesting findings from this science demonstrate how early environmental experiences can kind of hitch a ride into our future. So for example, if a mother is very stressed when she is carrying the baby in the womb, this stress can actually affect genetic kind of genetic expression or genetic mechanism in the developing child. And so later on, the stress experienced by mother in pregnancy can manifest in behavioral problems, for example, in children, because their genes are not expressing as they would be if this stress didn't occur. So these are this kind of really interesting phenomena where genes and environments can kind of have long-term effects on development. So finally, I just want to say something I already mentioned. So remember, DNA is kind of we stopped thinking about DNA as one or two genes of strong effect. Today we understand that human DNA is a very long text. So this is here, I'm showing you an exhibit from the Wellcome Trust collection in London, where this bookcase actually demonstrates the kind of the number of volumes that we would need to kind of express all the DNA sequence that we have in every cell of our body. So it's a whole bookcase full of information that sits in every cell of our body. So this is a lot of information. So we are just beginning to learn to understand how DNA affects our behavior. But what we now have learned is that not only that every human has a unique DNA code, but also that this text is being read or expressed within our cells differently depending on the environments that we are finding ourselves in. So what I want to say in conclusion is that, you know, we live in the genomic era. So this is the era that has started, the 21st century kind of marked the beginning of the era of genetic discoveries. And so there are many, many interesting kind of ancient questions that we can ask about humans. So things about roots and lineage and kind of ancestry, and things about free will and predicting the future or self-fulfilling prophecies. So these are all dilemmas that have been described in ancient texts. For example, famous Sophocles' tragedy, Oedipus Rex. But what I want to suggest is that all of these interesting phenomena in humans can be re-examined today with the knowledge that we are gaining from genetic science. So I think there will be many, many more kind of advances in this field. But also, as we also always say, it is very important that people think about genetics and what it means for humans, because, you know, it is time for us as societies to decide what we are going to do with all the genetic information that is emerging and how we will be using this information for our benefit and not kind of presenting risks for us. So at the very end, I just wanted to show you a resource which you might be interested in. So this is now nothing to do with genetics. I just wanted to kind of promote this excellent free access resource, which is coordinated by a group, a team of very good researchers in child development in Canada. So this is called Encyclopedia on Early Childhood Development. It's available in several languages, so whichever of these languages you want to read it in. And the way it's organized, it has many, many different topics. You can go into any of these topics, and there is a lot of information, so it's very well expressed. So it has kind of digest information, and it has summaries, and it has actually scientific articles commissioned from key experts in these fields. So these are the kind of topics, for example, pregnancy issues, many, family issues, many, children's health issues, again, many different topics, children's behaviors and children's education. I noticed some of the questions in the chat earlier today were actually questions where you can find, for which you can find some answers in this encyclopedia. So I really encourage you to use this resource. It's completely free. It's very trustworthy. It's kind of scientific information digested by key experts in these fields. So I hope this is useful, and I will be very happy to answer any questions you have.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia. That was very fascinating, as always. There's a short comment from Anna, who unfortunately had to leave. She was thanking Julia. Fascinating, especially interesting, as I'm a twin. We have a question from Caroline. Caroline stating this might be an odd question, but is there a genetic component that leads to a twin dying in the womb?
So yes, this is a very rare occurrence, but of course it does happen. We know very little about this event, so this sudden kind of death of a twin. What we do know is that there are sometimes, very rarely, but things can happen where when the twins, like if these are monozygotic twins, And when the twins are split, then actually something goes wrong with that split. And so the material is not properly allocated between the two organisms. And so that might be a problem, but that seems to be a random effect. There is also a position of the twins or competition for resources if they are positioned in a particular way that may lead to somehow resources going to the one twin rather than both. But these are, because these are such rare occurrences, it's very difficult to establish kind of a true cause. And probably these are different causes in different cases, including potentially some kind of genetic mutation, maybe de novo. De novo mutation is something that occurs only in this organism and not passed on from parents. So there are many, many kind of reasons that could be. Yeah.
Good. If you have any other questions, please put it on the chat. And I was just wondering, do you have any perhaps suggestions how this genetic knowledge could be incorporated in educational field? Like, what would you like to see happening, perhaps?
Yes. Well, what I would not like to see is kind of testing children's genes and making any kind of like segregating people on in terms of high potential, low potential, these kind of things. I don't think that society would ever get there, but you know, we need to be cautious. And so in this case, I think that there are some kind of maybe near future possibilities that are not something that I would personally endorse. What I would like to see in education generally is acceptance of kind of great individual differences in children, acceptance of the fact that not everybody can and should be studying everything at the same time, that actually there is a very wide scope for kind of doing little or not doing anything, or being engaged in some activities that are not, for example, sitting in a maths lesson and being paranoid about it. So I really do hope that kind of all of this information about individuality, about different kind of paths in development, about polyfactorial nature of problems and successes, so that it's not one thing, that once it penetrates kind of our minds and the minds of educators, I feel that we will be able to find better approaches to teaching than kind of uniform classrooms.
Great. There's another quite specific question. Has there been instances of monozygotic twin where one has autism and the other one doesn't?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Yes, absolutely. So this is the whole point, that we always say that both genes and environments are important. And so if autism was only genetic, then you would expect that if one monozygotic twins has autistic spectrum, then the other monozygotic twins also have it. And indeed, the kind of the concordance, co-occurrence between the two twins is very high. But nevertheless, there are cases where one monozygotic twin has autistic spectrum disorder and the other doesn't. And it's true of all other conditions. So, for example, ADHD or schizophrenia or major depression or anything else, although monozygotic twins are more likely to both have it, it is common for one have something and the other not. It's also true of all medical conditions, unless it's a very rare monogenic disorder like Huntington's disease. So yes, absolutely, monozygotic twins are not identical in the behavior. They are more similar than others, but not identical.
And the next question, I'm really interested in your recent comment on how mothers' anxieties could affect behavior in the child. And where can I find more information on this subject?
Mm-hmm. So, well, feel free to write to me and I can direct you further to resources. But you want to look into kind of epigenetic transmission, so in across families. So there's an emergent literature to kind of look at epigenetic mechanisms of the links between early childhood experiences, including pregnancy, and future child outcomes. So it's a growing literature because you need longitudinal studies where the same people are followed from birth. But there is a number of studies that already performed that demonstrate these links. And also there is animal literature. So for example, rats, mice have been serving as kind of animal models to study epigenetic transmission. So this is a very new science, but I think the results are very convincing.
Excellent. I think our time is up. So thank you again, Julia, for this fantastic talk. And we learn a lot about very new trends and techniques in developmental science. So thank you for this. And thank you, everybody, for joining us once again late on Thursday night. And I'll distribute these recordings from this talk as well as soon as they are up online. Have a good evening all, and hopefully we'll see you in a month's time.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your attention.